Welcome, everyone. Good afternoon to those of you on the West Coast. Good evening to those of you on the East Coast and everyone in between. Today, we're going to talk about the newer travel bans. This is part two, new travel ban and implications. Is focused on an update from our original and news or breaking news webinar that was last Thursday. So we'll go to the next slide, please. Right. So because we're attorneys, we always have to start out with our disclaimer. This does not constitute legal advice. It's for informational purposes only. And for legal opinions or questions pertaining to a specific case or issue, please schedule a consultation with one of our WR attorneys, and we'd be happy to help you. WR Immigration is Journey Forward. Our mission is provide clients with the best experience through strategic legal services, predictive technology solutions, and inclusive collaboration. We're an award-winning firm for our rapid technology as well as attorneys that have outstanding accomplishments. We have 10 offices globally with about 180 professionals, and we're here today to provide guidance, and we're glad to be here. I am Kimberley Best Robidoux. I'm a partner in the San Diego office of WR Immigration. I'm joined here with my East Coast colleagues, Dan Maranci, who's a partner in the Boston office of WR, and then Miki Matrician, who is the co-managing partner of the Boston office in WR. And they are both very involved in the community as well as with our American Immigration Lawyers Association with different committees. So we're all here to provide news breaking information, and we're just staying on top of topics. So good to be with both of you. Right, a roadmap. What are we going to do today? So we're going to talk about first the proclamation, the general conditions of the travel bans, the exceptions, the full entry ban, and then we're going to move on to the partial entry ban. We're also going to talk a little bit about the Harvard ban, and we'll wrap it up with some national interest exceptions and some other interesting information for everybody. So we'll get started. So the proclamation for the travel ban was issued on June 4th. It's titled Restricting the Entry of Foreign Nationals to Protect the United States from Foreign Terrorists and Other National Security and Public Safety Threats. So the general conditions of the ban that were put into effect, it went into effect at 12:01 a.m. Eastern Time on June 9th, which was just this past Monday. So this travel ban that was released, both the partial and full travel bans, apply to anyone who is outside of the United States on the day that the travel ban went into effect, which was Monday, June 1st, and who did not have a valid visa on the day that the ban went into effect. And then there's also one other condition that we talk about is that if those individuals were outside the United States, did not have a valid visa, and they have not been able to obtain a national interest exception under Section 3C and D of the proclamation if a national interest exception is necessary. So those are some things that we'll talk about as we move on. So since the travel ban was announced on June 4th and having gone into effect, the State Department has clarified that visas issued before June 9th will remain valid and no existing visas will be revoked under this proclamation. Now, there might be other reasons that a visa could be revoked, as we've been seeing lately with some situations, but under this clarification from the State Department, visas will not be revoked because of these specific the travel bans in the proclamation. There are still some issues that are not or have not been resolved yet, and we're waiting for further clarification from the State Department. And hopefully that clarification and guidance will be coming soon. So those unresolved issues are number one, whether current visa holders may apply for new visas after June 9th. And then the second one is whether foreign nationals in the U.S. on June 9th are exempt from the ban if they later travel abroad and apply for a new visa stamp. So in that circumstance, we're looking at, okay, if somebody was in the United States on June 9th, are they actually exempt from the ban? If at some point in time they're going to travel abroad and they have to apply for a new visa stamp. So we're waiting to see on that. Otherwise, those individuals might be landlocked in the United States unless they're potentially eligible for a national interest exception. So why now? Why are we talking about this now? Why is the travel ban happening now? and what's going on. So we've already been seeing employers reaching out for help in order to review their cases and mobility plans, right? It's important that all employers, human resource professionals, global mobility professionals, um, those who are in charge of business operations, pay attention to the bans, specifically if it's going to impact individuals who are in the United States who may need to leave for business purposes, or even if they need to leave for family emergencies. So it's also clear that the current administration is prioritizing national security narratives, but the practical impact that we're seeing on talent is actually significant, right? Like I mentioned, there are going to be individuals who are in the United States who are able to remain in the US who are not directly impacted by the travel ban by being in the US, but if they leave, they could potentially be impacted. So, and there may be individuals who are outside of the United States who are outside for business trips, or they were in the process of visiting family and friends, or just for various reasons that might not be able to get back to the US. So the travel ban in and of itself is significant, but it's also having a direct impact on talent recruitment as well as individuals that are significantly needed within the organization to engage in specific activities. So we're going to talk about some of the exceptions, right? So the travel bans do not apply to lawful permanent residents, which are green card holders. It does not apply to dual nationals who are traveling on a passport from a non-designated country. So, for instance, if someone is a national of or has a passport from two countries, but one is subject to the travel ban and the other isn't, they can travel on that passport as long as they have the appropriate visa with that passport. The exception is also that this travel ban or these travel bans don't apply to valid non-immigrant visa holders who are essentially, involved somewhere in the government. So the A's, the G's, and the NATOs. So those individuals are not impacted either. And then an interesting exception here, which, obviously, or maybe not so obviously, is because we want to ensure that individuals can enter the US who are members, who are athletes or members of an athletic team who are coming here for the World Cup in 2026, so about a year away, for the Olympics in 2028, or other major sporting events, which are determined by the Secretary of State. So those athletes and the associated athletic team members, coaches, et cetera, are exempt from this travel ban. And then also immediate family immigrant visas are exempted. Adoptees, Afghan special immigrant visas, and then special immigrant visas for U.S. government employees. And then last of all, immigrant visas for ethnic and religious minorities facing persecution in Iran. In addition, right, there's a few more exceptions. So an individual has been granted asylum or a refugee who has already been admitted to the US. And then what we don't typically see much of, but it also exempts individuals that have been granted withholding of removal or protection under the Convention Against Torture. And then the other thing is that, which is significant, is that no immigrant or non-immigrant visa issued before the effective date of the proclamation, which was June 9th, will be revoked specifically based on this proclamation. So that was some good news that we heard there. We're going to move on to the Harvard travel ban over in your neck of the woods in Boston. So I'll turn it over to you, Mickey.
Thanks, Kim. Yeah, so the Trump administration has also issued a proclamation, and this is essentially a travel ban, specifically targeting international students at Harvard University in Cambridge. Um, and, you know, the proclamation that was issued to become effective on June 9th would restrict the entry of new students on F, M, and J visas. And it's a little unclear why they included M visas because, M visas are for vocational students, which I'm not aware that Harvard has. But nevertheless, the proclamation was intended to suspend new Harvard students who attempt to enter the US to start school at Harvard. And the reason that I keep saying, it was intended to is because the travel ban was blocked by a federal judge on June 6th. And the federal judge in Boston essentially issued a temporary restraining order against this proclamation, stating that Harvard demonstrated it would sustain immediate and irreparable injury without the TRO. So the temporary restraining order is effective until June 20th or until the court issues a preliminary injunction. And there's a hearing set for June 15th to determine if the suspension of the ban will be extended or not via the preliminary injunction. So the suspension is supposed to last 6 months, but within 90 days, the Department of State is required to review the status and determine if it will be further extended beyond the 6 months. And so, as stated here, the proclamation is purporting to safeguard national security. The proclamation is interesting. It cites to violence and lack of cooperation by Harvard University with the demands of the Trump administration. Interestingly, it does not apply to students attending other universities. So that's one piece of it. And it does state that the Secretary of State shall consider whether foreign nationals who currently attend Harvard and already in the U.S. should have their visas revoked. So that's something to watch out for and monitor. And there are exceptions that are, that could be granted to those whose entry would be in the national interest. And all of this is really just after, DHS action targeting Harvard and in other ways too. I just want to quickly note, on May 22nd, Department of Homeland Security announced that it was revoking Harvard's SCVP certification. It's the Student and Exchange Visitor Program certification. And what that would do is to strip the university of its ability to enroll international students. So Harvard filed suit and secured a temporary restraining order from the U.S. District Court on May 23rd. So there's a bunch of different fronts on which Harvard is getting scrutiny. We can go to the next slide and I can turn it over to Dan.
Yeah, so we're going to talk about, the scope of the ban itself. But quick fun fact, my sister is incoming chair of Harvard's Near East Languages and Civilizations program. So needless to say, she's been grilling me a fair amount over those Harvard bans. And at some point, and hopefully the SEVP issue will not come back. But if it did, just looking at how it impacts OPT, the guidance is, if anyone's taking a look at it, is so painfully and confusingly written that, well, hopefully we won't have to go down that road. Anyway, so the list of countries in the final ban is here. We have some slides that sort of show you in a color-coded way how we kind of got there from the initial leak back in March. I think just overall, they were a lot smarter about how they approached doing this. So instead of immediately calling it a Muslim ban and getting, swatted down multiple times before they finally landed on a version that did sort of pass judicial scrutiny. And by that point, it was about to get rolled back anyway. So they had a time period during which they said, well, we're going to collect information and figure out, what makes sense for the travel ban. So we've all been on the edge of our seats to figure out what that was going to look like. So we had that initial leak. As with all leaks, you sort of ask yourself, how intentional might it have been? And there are a few interesting things that I noted in the final list. One is that there are some countries conspicuously absent that were on that initial list. So, for example, North Korea was on it. Then you have Burma that was on the partial that got bumped up. But I, sort of in the back of my mind, I'm like, okay, well, how does this overlay with the sort of commerce and treasury sanctions list? So those countries, you can't do business with them. Why are they not on here? Sort of an interesting question. But, again, North Korea is one of those sanctioned countries for export control purposes, as is Russia. So again, not on the list. I think obviously there was some political calculation, and not just political, but economic calculation too. So I guess we can go to the next slide. So that was the full ban countries. So no visa category without being able to obtain a national interest exception, which we'll talk about a little bit later. This is the partial ban list of 7 countries where it's restricted to B1, B2, F, M, and J visas that can't be issued absent, again, a national interest exception. That list, basically the entire list, the initial leak list was 43 countries, which they then whittled down to 19 countries. And some of these that were added to the list subsequently, people are theorizing it was visa overstays that they were focusing on. That was one of their big criteria that they wanted to add in part to be able to not be just sort of an arbitrary or religious-based ban. So that is part of what accounts for some of these countries. Yeah, let's go to the next slide. You can see sort of where it sort of went from the leaked list to the current list. You can see some pretty substantial changes there. Again, they were looking at national security and public safety threats. There's also the theory that that incident in Boulder, Colorado, which was tied to someone who had been a visa overstay, might have triggered them looking harder at the list of countries that were in the top percentage of overstays and starting to add some of those in. And there was also some sort of speculation around whether they had chosen the correct Congo. So because initially Democratic Republic of Congo was on the list, and then it sort of switched to Republic of Congo. So there was speculation they may have just sort of been confused, but then there was further speculation that Democratic Republic of Congo got taken off because we're in the midst of sort of some kind of mineral rights deal with them, which sort of shows you that this is not just a sort of a visa ban for the sake of a visa ban. It's also a global economic bargaining tool of some kind, is what some folks think about this. Let's go to the next slide. Yeah. So then this is the just so you could see all of the first for the March 2025 leak. Russia was on that list on the potential travel ban. It's now not on either list. And the June list, essentially, you also had Venezuela move from the complete ban to the partial ban. So they moved a few things around. No one knows exactly what the methodology was that they used, but it is the case that visa overstay was supposedly a big part of the decision making and the rates of overstay by country. We can go to the next slide. Yeah. So that's the sort of full list there from March 2025. I think it's how many countries is that? A lot. And then what you see here is what they took out of it. So out of that initial list of 43, they pulled the countries that you see listed there that are no longer referenced in any of the bans.
Yeah. Dan, do you mind if I ask you a question? Like, one of the things that we've been looking at is with Venezuela going from the full ban to a partial ban, and just looking at it as well in terms of the TPS, right? Because there's some inconsistency there with TPS for Venezuela has been essentially has been terminated. And there's a big fight over the 2021 and 2023 Venezuela. But with terminating Venezuela TPS, as well as terminating the parole programs for Venezuela, I was expecting them to be on the full ban and the
Yeah.
partial ban.
Yeah, that was a little bit of a, yeah, as I was looking at the sort of progression from the leak to now, that was a little bit of a surprise. I'm not, again, like, sort of hard to figure out how they rationalized that. I think it's just politics, is there politics, economics, visa overstays, national security. But again, like, if you're going to have North Korea on a sanction list, but not on even the partial list, it's sort of hard to sort of see what the thought process is there.
Yeah, absolutely.
We can go to the next slide. So this is a dashboard out of our rapid system. And one of the first things we did across the firm was say to ourselves, okay, we got our list. Let's figure out now who we need to contact immediately at our clients to let them know that there are these potential restrictions to them, in the future entering. So that's what we did. And it was super handy. We're pretty rigid about the data that we collect, and our system pulls in a good bit of it through OCR. So those were the numbers. So the total number 97, and you can see the distribution there of which countries they're from. And then we were able to automate being able to contact the clients first to just sort of let them know this was the case and find out what their preference was for how to communicate that warning. And then go to the next slide. Right. And so then we did the same thing with querying the system for, okay, well, who is a current Harvard F1? And that is what we returned. And some of them were mine. So that's just sort of the immediate sort of rapid, no pun intended, response that we sort of immediately jumped on when this happened. And no doubt we'll be seeing other data points that we're going to need to extract out of our system on short notice for precisely the same types of reasons going forward.
All right. This is not really a ban, but we thought we would sort of expand on the current state of visa interviews. So on May 27th, the administration temporarily paused scheduling of new F, M, and J visa interviews at all U.S. consulates worldwide. So it seemed to have been initially kind of intended at targeting higher education, but essentially this pause applies to all programs and impacts not just higher education but also U.S. secondary schools, and also part of the J1 programs are other categories like au pairs, which means that families using au pair help are impacted as well. And then employers rely on J visas for training and R&D and also for seasonal labor. So all of those sectors will be impacted also. And so initially, I think the Department of State has said they were supposed to keep appointments that were already scheduled, but we have heard reports that some already scheduled interviews were canceled after the directive was issued. And so how long is this going to last? We don't know. Initially, the Department of State said the pause would be short and that there would be an endpoint, that the expectation is not for the suspension to be weeks or months, but word on the street is that the pause might be prolonged. We don't know, but based on the fact that the reason for this is due to the fact that the concern expressed by the administration on the need for social media vetting. So if they have to develop a procedure and guidelines and then train staff, that doesn't really leave us very hopeful that this will end soon. And so, and when the suspension comes to an end, which we hope will be soon, we should expect some sort of backlog of applications as well. So we already kind of touched upon this topic a little bit, the national interest exceptions. It's a little bit of a guess what the national interest exceptions will look like and what kinds of cases would be approved. But, it is stated in the proclamation, there is a specific provision for it. We think it's going to look very differently than the COVID national interest exceptions, which were pretty readily given so long as you had the right documents and there was some sort of need. Um, it seemed like a lot of them were being issued. We were very successful in a lot of them. I don't think very many got denied. So, it'll be interesting to see how it plays out. But we wouldn't be surprised if the standards are a lot higher. Um, and so, in terms of documentation, there really would likely need to be a really strong argument as to why the entry of that impacted individual would advance a critical national interest. And so, a strong argument in a sworn declaration from not just the applicant, but the employer, or the end client. And then, along with that, employment verification letters, contracts, and financial documents really to show that there would be a significant, negative adverse consequence to the individual not coming to the United States. And so, what's considered national interest? I mean, in the past, it was really helpful for us to hook it into government issued documents or research or policy papers that showed that something is considered national interest by the US government. And then it's really important to show the sense of urgency. Why does this individual need to be in the US, and why quickly? And a quick note here about the DS Form 5535. That's something that could be requested by the State Department for more detailed information about the visa applicant's background, like travel history or details about family members and social media accounts and such. And next slide. So, essentially, it's if you are from one of the impacted countries and you don't have a visa currently, or you didn't have a visa as of June 9th, you cannot be granted a visa waiver unless you fall under an exception that is granted by the State Department. And so, as the proclamation says, it's really got to be case by case and it will be discretionary. And so, we don't expect it to be given out as readily as in the COVID period. And there's a specific carve out too, or I guess an example of what would be a critical national interest would be something that's related to investigation or something involving the Department of Justice. For example, if the individual has to be here in the United States to participate in criminal proceedings as a witness or something along those lines. So again, it's going to be really case by case.
And Miki, what do you think about you're mentioning that it might be more restrictive? I'm also thinking when we're defining the national interest and what we were seeing under COVID with people having to come in to participate in various critical infrastructure or critical areas in the government, just seeing what's been happening lately at the federal level with a lot of these programs and agencies being terminated, gutted, et cetera, that to a certain extent, a reason that may have been very valid in the past might not be as valid right now, given the current administration's change and what they consider to be critical.
I think that's such a great point, Kim, because it is so subjective, right? And the landscape is it's shifting. So what would have been considered a critical infrastructure or in the national interest by under the Biden administration may not any longer be considered as such under this administration. I think that's an excellent point.
So we'll just have to watch and see how that pans out.
Yeah, absolutely. So, what can global mobility or HR do? What should employers be doing? As we've touched upon with the reporting, it is so critical just to have data that's clean and robust, and reporting. In our system, we often provide reports to our employers that's self-service, so you can access at any time of the day, even in the middle of the night. And then really communicating to the employee population regarding the risks of leaving the United States and just making sure that, if somebody, decides to leave, maybe they have to leave because of a family emergency, something like that, that they're fully aware and that there's a plan in place with a discussion through, the business and potentially a backup plan. Are you going to let your employee work remotely from their home country if they end up being stuck? So essentially contingency planning, right? So it's important to have those conversations ahead of time if the employee does need to leave. And then reviewing it in the case of somebody who is needing to be outside of the US, reviewing, the exceptions. If they could fall under an exception, could they be eligible for national interest exception through a filing with the government? And so here again, a little bit more specific, but yeah, business travel. A lot of employers have reached out to me regarding, conventions or, an annual all hands meeting here in the United States. So it's really important to just take a granular look at all of the people that you are planning to have in the United States and plan ahead. And so we're fielding all these questions all the time. We tell our companies, please tell us before your foreign nationals book their international travel, and then for the foreign nationals to do the same directly with us. Dan or Kim, would you add anything there that you're advising your employers about?
When you're talking about, seeking, talking to counsel before making any moves or definitive travel plans, one of the things that I've always said to individuals and employers, like, we're not trying to be nosy. We don't, it isn't for that purpose. We want to ensure that when somebody leaves the US, they can actually get back into the United States. So it's really that planning in advance for how are we going to get this person back into the US? And then the strategic planning that you mentioned, Mickey, which is if this person cannot get back into the US, how is that going to impact business operations? What is the company going to do in order to account for that? Is there a policy that allows for an individual to work remotely from their home country for up to a certain period of time, usually before tax considerations come into play or other laws, have a direct impact on the company. So having that strategic plan in advance, plan for the worst and hope for the best. And, with talking to counsel about it, again, it isn't because we all are really, being nosy about where are people going, what are they doing, why are they doing this, but rather let's make sure that there's a plan to get back into the US. And if not, let's make sure that that's covered so that there's a strategic plan, but so that the company is aware of what impact it can cause and then limit any direct impact to the individual. So just out of concern, right?
It's also a good time if you want to revisit, like, I think the fourth point there, the internal mobility protocols, like, because it's going to get worse, and there's nothing more painful than reading those Customs and Border Protection transcripts of an expedited removal or withdrawal of admission. It's kind of miserable when you see where the questioning's going, and when the person who's a business visitor, gleefully talks about the great work they're going to do hands-on the project in the US. So, we deal with clients that have different internal structures around how they look at and control business travel, but now is probably a good time to do that. And there are, different technology solutions you can put in place for that sort of thing. But the sort of decentralized, just sort of make your own business travel plans based on, going online and just doing it, or your manager saying sure, fine, as opposed to centralizing and putting criteria in place for how that works. So now is, probably a good time to look at that if you haven't done that already. I mean, not that anyone wants additional things on their plate, but it's a consideration, I think, that a lot of companies are looking at now that don't have a centralized business travel program.
Right. And the other part of that, Dan, is you were talking about with, CBP at the ports of entry, when you have something that's centralized, you are aware of who's coming into the US, right? And what the purpose of their visit is. If a company gets a bad reputation at the port of entry, that can have a significant impact on the ability of other individuals to enter the United States. So that's one of the other things that we think about as well, right? How is this going to impact other employees of the organization or essential, consultants or business colleagues or partners that need to come into the United States. Because when there's a bad reputation that gets at the port of entry, that's in the system, and that can have a detrimental effect on the company.
Yeah. So, and if you have a really big program, we can do things like, probably less so than under prior administration, but they will meet like you can sometimes get CBP to come maybe even on site and talk to you about your program, and that'll get them familiar with the different profiles of traveler that you have, and it opens up a line of communication. And I think most are probably open to that, especially if they see a lot of your employees coming in. So it can be nice to get everybody around a room and just sort of talk about it.
Yeah, excellent point, Dan.
Everybody is just totally shocked at, what's happening right now with the travel bans and the raids and there's just a lot of turmoil this week.
It is a week. So, yep.
Yeah, and just staying on top of it, right? Listening to what's going on, keeping an ear open, eyes open, because it seems like every day there is a little bit something new that has a direct impact on employers.
Staying dialed into reliable information, right? Because
Yeah.
there's so much misinformation out there and so many rumors and so much fear mongering. So tap into your reliable sources.
Yeah, that just a little sidebar here. My mom lives in Florida, and I had sent her this map that I had found that shows all of LA, right? The 500 square miles or whatever it is. And then there's a little red circle that is around that 1 square mile that is impacted by the riots and the protests that are going on. And there was someone at the store who was going on and on and on about how LA is under attack and under siege and how many, what is happening to destroy the city. So my mom, this 70-year-old, turned out and said, well, let me show you a map of what's happening in California. So she's like, I want to spread the news with what actually is happening. And that person was really thankful for having that information, understanding what was happening.
Great.
So then a reminder to everyone, this webinar part 1 is up on YouTube. And if you have any questions, reach out to us. And again, thank you for your time this afternoon/evening. We're happy to talk through all these crazy issues with everyone. Good to see you both, Dan and Miki, and to talk through this.
Likewise.
Good to see you. Thank you, everyone.
All right. Have a great rest of the week.
Everyone.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye.